So for the past 2 years, people have been droning on about how good Steel Vengeance is. It's probably the most universally beloved coaster ever, besides maybe El Toro. Now, I myself have not been able to ride Steel Vengeance yet, but it's by far my #1 bucket list coaster. But for some reason, Tony Clark from Cedar Point implied that somehow they would top Steel Vengeance. Now first off, Tony, why would you say that? Now enthusiasts like myself are speculating if anything will top Steel Vengeance and what it could be. Now I know that he could have said that for a marketing ploy or because he works for Cedar Point or something, but I still thought it would be fun to speculate on what, if anything, could top Steel Vengeance. I mean, it might not even be possible. But before I start just randomly listing off coasters, I need to set some rules, or else I'll just go nuts. First off, it has to be in the realm of possibility. Yes, an Intimate prefab could probably top Steel Vengeance if they really played their cards right. But given that Cedar Fair hasn't worked with Intamin since I-305 in 2010, and the fact that Cedar Point already has 5 Intamins, I don't think we'll see anything from Intamin soon. So right off the bat, that's going to knock off prefabs, their new generation hypercoasters, and their switch track blitz coasters. And the other rule I want to point out is that this will have to be the world's best coaster. Whether or not Steve is the world's best coaster is up for debate, but it certainly is in the top 3 or at least the top 5. So if Cedar Point were to top Steel Vengeance, I think they would have to go all out. I don't think they would top Steel Vengeance, but it'd only be the 2nd best coaster in the world behind like Lightning Rod or Expedition G-Force or something. I don't know. This basically means the models I'm choosing are going to be pretty unique because they're full of potential. We just haven't seen a lot of them in their fully fleshed out form. Like yeah, Cedar Point could build the best B&M Giga ever, but with Fury being so close to perfection and Fury still almost being universally agreed to be worse than Steve, it knocks a B&M Giga off the table. So without further ado, let the speculation begin. The Mack Hypercoaster is a ride model that's always confused me. Don't get me wrong, Mack multi-launchers are good, but I always thought the Mack Hypers were where it's at, and I always hoped we would eventually see another. However, as time has gone on, and as Mack has shifted their focuses to other models, I don't know if we'll ever see one of these again. And it really sucks because this model has so much potential. Mack Rides is like the only manufacturer besides RMC that has the balls to put inversions in their hypercoaster layout, and it's something that I really appreciate. It spices things up from just airtime hill after airtime hill after airtime hill that other manufacturers are known for doing, like B&M and Intamin. The Mack Hypers also aren't afraid to do weird stuff. Some of these elements are almost RMC-like, and it looks really different from everything else Mack has done. But despite all that, I think it would take a really good layout on one of these to top Steel Vengeance. DC Rivals is the best Mack Hypercoaster right now, but even that isn't better than Steel Vengeance. So this would have to be even better than DC Rivals. I don't know if it's even possible, but I'm going to give it my best shot. If this were to happen, and if I were to be the person to design this, I think there would have to be a couple things with the layout. First off, yet again, this would have to be another 200-foot coaster. I know it's kind of become a meme with Cedar Point, but if we're going to top Steve, this coaster needs the height. I also think it would need a twisted drop. The twisted drop is something we don't really see often, and when we do, it's almost always considered a highlight of the ride. This would also need a massive non-inverting loop like on DC Rivals. This would be one of the standout elements on the ride, and as the first element after the drop, you would really whip through it at the top. Then you could go into something like a massive airtime hill that'll give straight ejector. None of that twisting nonsense yet, but it would give really strong airtime like the ejector hills on Helix or on DC Rivals. Now after this would be the first on the Mack coasters, but one of these B&M Hyper speed hills. Make this low to the ground and a little drawn out. Not that drawn out, but a little bit. So kind of like Mako or Candemonium or Orion Speed Hill. Then after that, you go into a unique turnaround. Now, not a coaster designer, but some sort of unique turnaround would be nice. Some examples of unique turnarounds would be Fury's Treble Clef, the Hyperion Dive Drop, or the Wallaby Belgium non-inverting Cobra Roll. Just something different from a basic Hammerhead turnaround. After the unique turnaround, I'd like to see a large twisted airtime hill. This would give great ejector and be different from the first straight ejector hill that we've seen thus far. After that, you go into a wave turn similar to the one found on the Flash Hypercoaster. I don't know how strong these actually are, but for this coaster, Mack would profile it to be like Lightning Rod's wave turn and not to Orion, so it would actually give airtime. After the wave turn, you can go into a whippy 0G roll, and then into a twisted, smaller ejector hill. Then you go into 2 smaller straight ejector hills after that to finish out the ride. Now, would this be better than Steve? I don't know. It's possible, but I'm not Alan Schilke. I just made up the layout of different elements found in Mack Hypers. But regardless, this would still be a great ride. I think with a few tweaks, it could be better than Steve, maybe if we add a little bit of length, but off the top of my head, that's what I could come up with. Regardless though, I think Mack Hypers definitely has the potential to beat Steve, but Cedar Point and Mack would have to make a really good layout. Of all the models I'm going to talk about today, this is probably the most likely out of happening. However, I also think this is the least likely model to actually be able to top Steel Vengeance, and it's really just because of the model itself. Sure, a full-scale 4D coaster would be incredible, but could you really see a 4D coaster being the best coaster in the world? Being better than Zadra, ElToro, Lightning Rod, Expedition G-Force, and of course Steel Vengeance? I just don't think it could. As cool of a model as this is, I don't think it's good enough to beat Steel Vengeance, but I'd love to be proven wrong. If Cedar Point were to try to beat Steel Vengeance with an SNS 4D coaster, it would need to be big, like bigger than Energylandia. But even then, I don't know if that's enough. It would also have to be a super unique layout, unlike any of the other 4D coasters, because those are all kind of the same. But this is actually something that I could really see happening. The Mack Hyper coaster is a little far-fetched. Mack is really expensive, and they already have a couple coasters in the park that are like it, but a 4D coaster, there's nothing in the park like a 4D coaster. The closest thing is Gatekeeper, but even that doesn't come close to the insanity of something like X2. Now this would be expensive. It would be at least as expensive as Energylandia, which was $30 million. But DC Rivals was $28 million, so anything that could top Steve is going to be expensive. The reason I say this is probably most likely of happening is, number one, there's nothing in the park that's like it, and number two, we're seeing Cedar Fair start to work with SNS even on a 4th dimension coaster at King's Dominion. So it's not totally out of the question to assume that they would try and work with them again. Now, if we're talking layout, I really don't know what it could look like. There would need to be a vertical drop and a 0G roll, but beyond that, I have no idea what makes a good 4D coaster. I just know everyone loves them. So on a similar note with the Mack Hyper, I feel Cedar Point really needs a new generation hyper coaster, similar to the relationship between Phantom's Revenge and Steel Curtain. Magnum was literally the first hyper coaster, and even though it's really good, it seems a little outdated. I'm not saying remove Magnum, but I'm saying another hyper wouldn't hurt, just as long as it's different from Magnum. That's why a B&M Hyper wouldn't work, but a Mack Hyper and a Vekoma Hyper would. Vekoma's been making some good stuff, and it's about time we see some in the US. That being said, I don't think Cedar Fair would test out the new Vekoma on their flagship park. So this would be a little ways off, but I think all of these wouldn't be for at least 5 years. These new generation Vekomas look really good. The Bermuda Blitz in particular really catches my eye, and that proposed Energylandia Hyper that lost to the Hyperion we know today looked really good. You know what this ride was like? It's like a decked out version of Superman the Ride. Like if Superman the Ride was mixed with a Chance Hyper GTX, and I'm all for that. One of the best things about Steve is that it seamlessly mixes two completely different type of coasters. One half is huge elements, and the other half is tight elements that weaves in itself. If Vekoma did a Hyper mixed with Twister just like they did here, you already eliminate one of the best aspects of Steve. Of course, the elements still have to be good, but by taking away one of Steve's biggest strength, being that it's a hybrid between two types of coasters, it really makes it more likely that they can top it. The big elements on this also look really good. These look like the taller Intamin Hyper Hills packed with sharp ejector that just punch you in the gut, or like the 5-second floater hills on Mako and Candemonia. The Speed Hill also looks great, and it's exactly what I want in the Mack Hyper. I'm gonna be honest, I would rather see this than a Mack Hyper, but I think this is the less likely out of the two. I also like how they're not afraid to put inversions in their layouts just like Mack. I think the Mack inversions are better, but this implement is a good start. Overall, if Cedar Point were to get a custom layout, something like this but slightly tweaked a bit, this would have a really good shot to top Steel Vengeance. So the last thing that I think could possibly top Steve is a 500-foot RMC T-Rex. Now, yes, I know this kind of sounds cliche, but I truly believe that it has a shot, and probably the best out of all of these. The RMC T-Rex has almost suffered the same fate as Millie, in my opinion. People start saying how it's so overrated that it almost became underrated. I don't think people understand the magnitude of the RMC T-Rex just because people have started to hate on it so much. The first drop in the back row alone could top Steel Vengeance. You just have to think about how big Top Thrill Dragster is, and then add another 80 feet. Oh, and put a lift hill on that in an actual amazing layout. The layout could be RMC's worst creation to date, but it would still be fantastic because it's Alan Schilke. Like I said, the first drop alone would be the best to date. 500 feet is really tall. Like that's like falling down Fury's drop, and then adding Mako's drop to it. It's huge. If this thing has lap bars like it says it will, this drop is going to be the best drop on a roller coaster without question. And considering we're having an amazing layout afterwards, this could easily take over Steel Vengeance. Steve's layout is fantastic, and the biggest reason why people like Steve, not the stats, not the theming, it's the layout. But what you have to remember is that the RMC T-Rex will be designed by the same guy that designed Steel Vengeance. If Cedar Point goes to Alan Schilke and says we want an RMC T-Rex that'll top Steel Vengeance, Alan Schilke will cook up something to do just that. People say they're most excited for the Access and the inverting GCIs, but I'm sticking with the T-Rex, guys. If Cedar Point goes all out and builds a 500-foot T-Rex with a great RMC layout afterwards, I think this could be the best coaster in the world. But that's going to do it for today, guys. I want to hear what you think. Do you think any of these models could top Steel Vengeance? And if not, what do you think could? As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Thumbs if you liked it, subs if you loved it. It's been fun. Bye, guys.